Well, there's something you don't see every day. 1977 Olds Toronado. It's got 42,000 original miles on it. It's never been winter driven, always been garaged. It's here for some routine maintenance and an inspection. Another shop is called the CV shaft and the CV boot and lower ball joints, idler arm and pitman arm. So we're going to have a look at that stuff. This is a pretty rare vehicle in its day. Not too many of these still around here, that's for sure. This thing is in remarkably good condition. Original paint, original pinstriping, original Landau roof. Well, let's put it up in the air and have a look at it. So we got the car up in the air. We're going to have a look underneath here. Definitely has some issues with the CV boots. That side is completely ripped open and most of the grease is thrown out of it. This side is compromised, but it hasn't thrown all the grease out of it. So I think this is the one they called the boot on. And this one they call the shaft, the complete shaft. Got to make sure that shaft looks correct. I noticed that there's some play in the lower ball joints, so we're going to replace those. They look correct. The idler arm has some movement in it. That's it up there. And that looks correct. A little bit of oil seepage here. I'm not sure if it's anything one specific. Pan gasket maybe. The body on the vehicle is unbelievably clean considering the age of the vehicle. There's no rust on the frame. It looks like it's been oiled. It's had new mufflers and tailpipes put on it. That's understandable. I never tried the parking brake, but we will. Brake lines look solid. Brake hoses look okay. No rust on the floorboards. Fuel lines look okay. That's the fuel line, the top one, and the return line on the bottom, I believe. Tires don't look bad. Don't know the age of the tires. Let's see if we can find the age number on here. I don't see it yet. Maybe it's on the outside. Don't see it. I don't see it on that tire. Well, we'll have a look at the tires for weather cracking. They look pretty decent. Sidewalls look pretty good. Remember, this thing was stored indoors. Hasn't seen much sunlight, so that's probably helped. Where's the date code on that tire? Well, rocker panels are beautiful. Frame is solid. Just normal rub marks on the paint, like down here. But no Bondo, no body work been done that I can see. It's definitely been oiled, and I think that's helped save it a bit. Look at the chrome on that bumper. Imagine if you polished that, how that would come out. So the front rotors are in good shape, and there's adequate brake pad there. There's roughly 4 millimeters and 5 millimeters on the inboard pad. On the rear, don't quite make it, unfortunately. There's only about 0.6 millimeters of brake shoe above the rivet. Although it looks thick here, it's based on the rivet head. That's one's 0.8 millimeters, and this one was 0.8 millimeters on this side as well. You can see there's not much there. They're pretty much almost flush, so it's going to need rear brake shoes as well. Wheel cylinders are fine. The drums measure okay. The drums are like new. The original drums, they could use a cleaning, but other than that, they're at basically original size. So a set of rear brake shoes are in order as well here. So I'm starting on the ball joint repair and the CV shaft repair. Lots of grease here. Got these brake pads off, and they got about 2 millimeters of pad above the rivet. I realized just now that the pad material is riveted on, so you got to measure from the rivet head to the surface. The spec is a minimum of 1.6 millimeters or 2/32. Considering we have the pads off now, we're going to have to take both of them off anyways. I'm going to throw a set of brake pads in this thing as well. So I have the steering knuckle separated at the upper and lower ball joints. The upper ball joint is good, so we're going to reuse it, but this lower one is wore out. Ran into a snafu, took off the 7/16 12-point heads bolts that hold the CV shaft to the differential carrier, and it won't come through between the frame and the lower control arm. Yeah, maybe if I raise the suspension, but I'm going to try taking the joint off at the outboard end here. I think this one is held together with a snap ring inside here, so it's really just a matter of cutting this boot off and taking the joint off of it. So I'm going to try and do that. So this outer CV joint has an internal snap ring, so basically you just clean the grease out after you cut the boot off, and then spread that snap ring and slide the shaft off, so we can leave the shaft in there and clean it up right where it is. Repack that joint, replace that boot. So there's the new boot installed. That joint was in good shape. Repacked it, put the clamps on so that the rotation of the shaft won't catch anything. So now we gotta chisel off these rivets. This is welded, this ball joint. Looks like it's welded into this control arm, so I'm gonna have to figure out whether we have to drill that or what's going on. So I did have to drill the rivets on these sides and drill the center. I used I think a 1/2 inch, or one size below a 1/2 inch. And the new ball joint is obviously bolted in. It comes with the bolts and this nut. There were no specifications on it. I torqued these to 28 foot-pounds. They're 3/8 bolts, and I torqued this to 45 foot-pounds. Put the CV shaft back on and torqued those 3/8 bolts to 26 foot-pounds with a little dab of red Loctite on them for good measure. Couldn't find a spec in the service literature anywhere. So there's the left side back together. Now I'm attempting to replace this pitman arm. You gotta press that pitman arm off the steering box. So I'll have to unbolt the steering box from the frame. By the looks of it, there's the puller for the socket end. To undo it. So it's necessary to move the steering gear. Either take it right out or move it down so that you can get pitman arm puller on it. I disconnected it at the intermediate steering U-joint. I wasn't sure if there was a master spline on it, so I marked it with a center punch and white paint just to be safe. But I think there is a flat on here where the bolt goes, so, but nevertheless it's always wise to mark things just to be safe. Now hopefully I can slide this power steering gear. Took the shield plastic pins out. Hopefully we can drop the steering gear down now. So now you can lower the steering gear enough to access the bolt or the nut. It's 30, roughly 34 millimeters. Take the nut off, take the washer out, and put the nut back on flush. And then we're going to put the snap-on puller on here to pull this pitman arm off. So there's the puller set up. Righty-tighty. Well, that was pretty tight, but it's been on there for a few years. Okay, now we just take the pitman arm off, clean the splines, put the new one on. Well, there's the left side all done. Tie rod reconnected, steering gear installed, pitman arm installed, idler arm replaced. Now tomorrow we're going to pull this other side apart. Hopefully I'm going to try to take the axle shaft out by bringing it inboard. Couldn't do it on this side because the differential's in the way, but I'm hoping I can take it out by dropping it down and pulling it out by the starter here. We'll see. It's going to be questionable. I hope we can get it out of there. Is that brake fluid leaking out of the caliper? Or is that oil? Oh well, we'll find out. Well, success. The right axle shaft comes out by tilting it and sliding it past the starter here. You just barely makes it. Once you get the big end of this through here, then you can actually twist it and pull it out. So now we're going to drill out the rivets on this ball joint, replace the lower ball joint, and put it back together again. So there's the lower ball joint installed. I did have to drill these about halfway, drill them 3/8 and drill them into the control arm about 1/4 inch. Then you can use an air chisel and just chisel the top of that spot weld off there, and the ball joint will knock out of there with the air chisel. So now we're ready to reassemble this thing. I would be curious if that axle shaft would go in with the knuckle installed, but I'm not going to bother trying. I'm going to just slip the axle shaft in here and then reassemble it the same way I took it apart. So there's the right side back together, new brake pads, new anti-rattle clip on the inner pad. Make sure you bend these ears closed so that the brake pad is tight in the caliper. I like to bend them before and then pry them on there with a pair of channel locks. I cleaned up the caliper pins, brake grease on the caliper pins, and we're ready to put I got to grease the ball joints and put the wheel back on. So there's the left rear drum brake assembly replaced. Take all the parts off, clean up the backing plate, give it a coat of paint, put some brake grease on the pad surfaces where the brake pads touch or brake shoes touch. New hardware kit as well. They're cheap. Doesn't come with this spring or this spring in the hardware kit, nor does it come with the tension or the adjuster. And we're gonna adjust the brakes once we get the drum back on. So we're about to put the right side together. These are self-energizing brakes, so the primary shoe is shorter lining and sometimes thinner. And you can see the secondary shoe, which is self-energizing. These tend to turn in a clockwise motion, at least going forward anyways, and that puts more pressure on the secondary shoe. So the brake shoe with the longer lining goes towards the back of the vehicle. Make sure this self-adjuster spring is already intact. Now you can pick this up as an assembly, and I'll show you how I do this. Okay, so first and foremost, grab the assembly like this and hook this emergency brake assembly in there. Slide this onto the stops just like so. And we're going to put the brake shoe anchor pin in on the back. And I'm using this snap-on brake tool. There's lots of different ones like this. Turn it 90 degrees, make sure it's locked in place. Now we gotta find the self-adjuster, some dielectric grease, brake grease on there, slide that in. Don't worry about the return springs just yet. This one takes a shorter spring. Put that in through the back. Can't find the hole. There we go. Make sure it's not locked in place. Now we're going to put the crossbar in, and we can slide this one out. This adjuster link. There we go. Now the orange spring goes in. This was up on that side, but that does look like it's right. Yeah, that doesn't look right. Doesn't look correct. This seems like a lot of tension on this spring. Yes, that's... I remember this side being up, but now it's interfering with that spring. Was it stuck in that spring before? Well, let's take this off again. if we can put this equalizer bar on the other way. Yeah. So I swear when I took this off that this equalizer bar had the ear facing up, but I had to put it in like the other side with the ear facing down. So I don't think there's a left and a right, but it's in there correctly now. This ear was digging into the spring, so it must have been facing down and I must be dreaming. This spring you can pop in afterwards. And of course, the adjuster works. So we're going to put the brake drum on now. So we'll throw a little coat of paint on the drums to make them look a little better. These wheels were originally on the front, and the inside of the rims were caked full of grease from the CV boots. So I pressure washed them, and we're going to put them back on. Wow, it's like sitting on my living room couch going 60 miles an hour down the highway. Car's all ready. Runs good, steers good. Steering could be centered a little bit better. Got to go for a wheel alignment. But otherwise it just floats. This thing is just like all those old rear-wheel drive cars in the 70s. Nice and smooth. Thanks for watching.